Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members. I listened yesterday afternoon to Senator Champion in the Finance Committee, and he asked the members of that committee to walk in his shoes, or at least try. Senator Kiffmeyer responded saying that she believed that was the right thing to do as well. And as we have debated this bill, the provisions in the bill, Senate File 7, and the amendments to the bill, I feel like we've spent most of our time not really trying to walk in the shoes of another person, but instead hold fast to the positions, especially the position of a agreed-upon global arrangement that essentially blocks the voices and the efforts of the members who so very much want to be a part of this process. And that is the case for many Minnesotans as well, and it is the reason why I am disappointed in Senate File 7. I was in the rotunda earlier yesterday afternoon and encountered a woman that I know. Her name is Zainab. She is a brilliant young woman. She has been active in her community, and yesterday she was transitioning between two strong emotions, one of anger and the other of despair, wondering why it is that this legislature isn't willing to hear her voice. She recognizes the power of what we're capable of doing in this body, President Miller. She recognizes the power and can't understand why we won't use our power to protect her life. And perhaps if the law had been changed years ago on body cameras, Mr. Terrence Franklin would be alive. And perhaps if the law had been changed before on pretextual stops, Mr. Philando Castile would be alive, and perhaps so would Mr. Dante Wright. And perhaps if the law had changed in 2020, perhaps then Mr. George Floyd would be alive today. Those lives, Mr. Franklin, Mr. Castile, Mr. Wright, Mr. Floyd, those lives all mattered. This is a public safety bill, and it's one of the reasons why this bill is insufficient. The terms for the agreement that we're debating today were set on May 17th, when the majority leader said, we will not support anything that law enforcement doesn't support, seemingly giving law enforcement organizations a veto over anything that would happen after the end of May 17th. That's not the first time that I have seen a legislative body like this one give over its power to outside voices, like we saw happen with the Catholic Church, when year after year we were hearing reports of children being harmed by priests. And the church said nothing was happening, and powerful bodies like this one turned away from intervening. And as a result of that, many, many young people in Minnesota were harmed. It is not the first time that a powerful body like this one has given its power over to an outside group. The terms of this legislation of Senate File 7 were set on May 17th, and when the agreement for this legislation was announced over the weekend, the majority leader said that he was happy because this would keep communities safe. And therein lies the problem with this legislation, because we're not clear about what is the definition of safety in this public safety bill. And I would argue that our safety as Americans is rooted not in policing, but in our freedom, in our liberty. It is an American value. It's a principle on which this country was founded, and it is the unfinished work for anyone who believes in America. I do. Our safety in community is embedded in the very freedom that we cherish. And until all of us are safe, then we are not all free. And when I think about safety, it's not embedded in this bill, but instead it is strong schools in our communities with enough teachers and counselors and nurses to make sure that our kids are getting what they need, and after-school programs with strong educators and coaches to support our kids when they're not at home. And when I think about safety, it means housing, and especially if you're raising a lot of kids, a safe place where your kids are safe with you as a family. We haven't achieved that yet in Minnesota. When I think about safety, it is a job where I can earn enough to support myself and my family, and it's generational wealth that is transferred from generation to generation, which we have seen interrupted by redlining and efforts to divide communities like we saw here in St. Paul, in the Rondo neighborhood in the last century. Safety is being able to drive without the fear of losing your life. And this topic has come up over and over today. And this is where I wish we would walk in another's shoes, because there are clear examples, including what Senator Champion said yesterday in the Finance Committee about the lack of safety that Black and brown people feel when they are driving and they are pulled over. Senate File 7, the bill that we have spent hours debating today, is a public safety bill, and yet it fails to address the safety of our communities. In part because the majority leader and the majority of this body decided that we wouldn't do anything without the approval of law enforcement, taking the power of this body and our ability to represent our communities out of our hands. And it's why Zainab doesn't believe that this body is interested in her voice, and why this bill fails her and her community, and those who have been standing up and clearly saying that more policing does not make them safe. In fact, more policing makes them feel fear. And without our ability to, with empathy, listen and respond to those communities, we're not meeting the needs of Minnesotans. Let me just say one more time that our safety is rooted in our freedom, and until we are all safe, then we are not free, and we have not met the promise of our Constitution or this country. This bill is insufficient for Minnesota, and I will vote no and urge you to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.